What do we got here? Ryan. Hi, I was hoping you might be able to help me understand how the Bitcoin network deals with congestion once it gets more adoption. I'm 85% Bitcoin maxi. Pretty solid. Pretty high number there. I'm just not sure of this problem. So the beauty, actually, I'll bring this back up. Congestion is a good thing. So right now we don't have any congestion. This is what things look like on the blockchain at this moment. So you can tell by the amount of fees, 2 sats per VByte. That's a pretty good indicator of how much demand there is for block space. So all you need to do is just think about, break it down in its simplest form and take a look at how this whole thing works. So every time you send a transaction, a Bitcoin transaction, if I was going to send Bitcoin from my wallet to Ryan's wallet, what is that? What's happening there? What's in that transaction? Am I sending him anything physical? Am I sending him an IOU? No, I'm just sending him data. That's all a Bitcoin transaction is. It's just data. And so every one of these blocks here has a maximum amount of data that can be included in it. So that's where the demand is. That's where the demand comes from, the demand for block space. So all of these transactions, if we go into this block had 2,170 transactions, and all those transactions are just a bunch of data. And so you can only fit so much data and so many transactions within one block every 10 minutes. That's the demand aspect of this, right? And so what you have to keep in mind there is with your UTXOs, this is kind of an aside from this, but I think it's important to note that the more UTXOs within your transaction, the more data is in that transaction, and the more it's going to cost you to send that transaction. So that's kind of just an aside in there. That's why you want to really look after your UTXOs and keep every time you send a transaction, you want as little amount of data in there as possible, because it takes up less space in that block and you pay less fees for that. Does that make sense? So in terms of the congestion, it's been congested before. So when there's every time I send let's go back to the transaction. I send this transaction to Ryan. What happens there is it actually sits in the mempool on this side. It stays there until I'm willing to pay a high enough fee to get myself into a block. So the more people, the more transactions, the more demand there is for Bitcoin, the more congested this mempool is going to be. There's going to be a lot more transactions sitting in there waiting to be put into the next block. So when that congestion happens, there's nothing that we can do about it. That's what we want to happen. You want more demand on the blockchain. You want fees to be higher, because that's how the miners are going to get paid, and that's how the network is going to continue to be decentralized and secure, and people plugging in, the hash rate goes up. You want that. So in terms of what are we going to do from our side as users, we have to pay very close attention to our UTXOs. We have to pay very close attention to what we're using for Lightning, for Liquid, for eCash. That's what's being built on top of Bitcoin right now. That's going to kind of alleviate some of this congestion in the future. So I do foresee a day, and this is not my opinion or my new thoughts, but I do foresee a day where it's going to be almost impossible for the everyday person to send a transaction on the Bitcoin network, because it is going to be so congested. But what you can be doing there is you can convert it to Lightning. You can send it back and forth for very low fees, very cheaply and instantaneously. So most people in life will never have their own UTXO. They'll never send a Bitcoin transaction on layer one. The only reason why people are doing it right now and why we've been able to do it today is because we're 15 years into this thing. Think 100 years from now. And actually, I'm going to bring that up for a second here. What am I looking up? There it is. Honestly, this is why I love the show, because questions like this come up, and I think it helps. Even if you've heard this before, even if I've said it before, I learn things. I learn by talking about this stuff. Obviously, people can tell there's no script here. There's no teleprompter. It's just, and some information might be wrong, but I think that if I don't know something, I usually try to say. But let's look at this. Where are we here? Uh-oh. We're going to come back to this later. So I'm glad I brought this up right now. But take a look at this spreadsheet. So like I said, I'm saying we're 15 years into this, but think about when we're 115 years into this. So what would that look like? That would be the year 2000 and what? 24? No, that'd be 100 years from now. 21. Okay, let's just do 100 years out from now, which I guess would be 115 years. So at that time, this is how scarce Bitcoin is going to be. So every block reward is going to be, what is that? 1,800 sats. So all the electricity going into the Bitcoin network in 2124, every block reward is going to get, that might even be less than that. That might be 186 sats or 1 sat. Okay, so this would be 10 million. That'd be 1 million, 100,000, 10,000, 1,000, 100. That's 1 sat. So in 100 years from now, the entire world, the entire Bitcoin infrastructure is going to be competing over 1 sat every 10 minutes. Every year in 2020 and 21-24, there's going to be 1 million sats new issued. 1 million sats for the entire planet. So of course it's going to cost more. It's going to be more congested. We're 15 years into this. There's already solutions being built to alleviate that pressure off of the network. And in 100 years from now, I'm sure we'll have 1,000 more things that we can be doing. But that, I just wanted to kind of emphasize how rare it's going to be to actually own a UTXO and be able to transact on the Bitcoin Layer 1 network. So if you've done that before, you're a legend, officially. All right, I see Pat. I wanted to say it again. Pasty, Afternoon Bitcoin Army. Daniel has zapped 552 sats for a hump today. Plunger's here, and Plunger has zapped 100 sats. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of Zap.stream, for your sats. So think about that. Plunger just zapped 100 sats on Zap.stream. In 100 years from now, they're going to be competing over 1 sat every 10 minutes in Bitcoin. And that's a really good way to start the show, I think, because I want people to start really thinking about 100 years out, not next year, not next week, next month, next year, 10 years from now, but 100 years from now. That's where people's minds need to be. If you really want to see this thing through, and if you really want to change the direction of your life and your family's life and your great-great-grandkids' life, you have to be thinking 100 years out. So anyways, Ryan, that was a great question. And congrats on being an 85% maxi. That's unreal. And Daniel says, this is a great comment from Daniel. I'm going to zap this, actually. I'm going to zap Daniel back. That's the beauty of Zap.stream. There you go, Daniel. I just zapped Daniel for this comment. The wild part about that is that in some way, let me start again. The wild part about that is that in some way, the energy that it will take to mine that sat 100 years from now is contained within each sat today. It's the exact same thing. The sat that's issued every 10 minutes, 100 years from now, is going to be no different than the sats that are flying around on Zap Stream right now, the sats that are flying around on Nostr right now. It's the exact same thing. It's just energy. There's just going to be a lot more people fighting over it in 100 years from now. Living in the future. That's what we are. That's where we are. Big shout out to everybody, by the way. We've got like 10 new. I saw 5 people jumped in the Discord last night before I went to bed. I'm like, holy shit. This place is buzzing. So we got some very exciting things coming in the Living in the Future community. I talked about one yesterday. I haven't heard much feedback from it yet. So either people are letting it sink in or it was a shitty idea. I think it was a great idea. Thinking along the same lines as 100 years out, I think if you put something like that in place today and you go in with a very long-term mindset, the catchphrase I wanted to use for it was doing good in the world without putting a dent in your stack. I think that's kind of like the mission for that project that we're working on within Living in the Future. Doing good for the future without putting a dent in your stack. So as Bitcoiners, I think we all have this idea of being helpful, being good in the world. When that influence and that wealth shifts from the pedophiles, the corruption, the parasites, the leeches that have the wealth now, and it shifts into the hands of good people, everything changes. And so I think as Bitcoiners, we have this very long-term vision, some of us do, about doing good in the world and helping every way that we can with the purchasing power that we're going to accrue over the years. And instead of just trying to get as much as you can and help as much as you can, I think that having something like what I was talking about yesterday in terms of the bank, it would be a way for just every, if you have 1,000 sats, if you have 500 sats, you put it into this fund, you get ownership of that fund, and you can use that fund to do good, and you can keep your personal stack for yourself, for your family. So if you haven't watched that video yesterday, make sure to check it out, because it's, and again, even if you don't join, if you cancel, even if you implement something like that within your own friend group, within your community, that's what it's more so about. It's getting the idea out there and getting people to think very long-term in Bitcoin. Hey, Rajesh. Good morning. I sent you a message this morning. Did